Hello, welcome to the AppleInsider Podcast. I'm William Gallagher. Our sponsor this week is Fast Growing Trees, and as ever, I am joined by Wes Hilliard. Now, Wes, Apple was having quite a bad week, really, wasn't it? With judgments against it, rulings, potential criminal proceedings even, but then the money came through. The earnings report came through, and it was all very good news. So, all the stuff about tariffs and things, can we just forget that? Apple's fine and doing brilliantly?
Well, I mean, as always, this is the calm before the storm. We'll see how it goes. I mean, Apple having a good quarterly earnings call, especially for this first quarter where there was just so many devices released, and there was this tension already building over should we buy ahead of time, should we get ahead of these potential tariffs that had been promised this entire campaign. People obviously got in before we even saw the April tariffs and started buying, iPhones and Macs just in case, before we even knew the extent of what they were going to be. So yeah, it was a positive quarter. It makes sense, but I mean, who knows what next quarter is going to be like? That's the one to look for. But hey, I mean, at least they got while the getting was good.
Right. So as we said last week, my buying of a Mac Studio helped tip them over into the red. No, wait, into the black. I get those mixed up, which may explain a lot about my finances, really. But, okay, Apple will survive and survive well. What about this business, though, of Epic Games? Because we've both written quite a lot about this. I've examined the specifics of what Apple must now immediately do on the App Store to comply with the rulings. But you were there for what was going on as it was breaking, as the announcements came out, and as there were responses to it. I'm hearing people saying that this is a gigantic thing, and others saying it's overplayed. How do you feel about... do you want to explain first what the new events are and who's winning and who's losing?
Well, first, I did want to mention we have AppleInsider Plus today. So if you guys are paying for the show, you're getting an ad-free experience. And we're going to have a topic where we're going to discuss Apple. Again, does its success as a company play any role in our appreciation of the company, of our purchasing power, of why we're going after this companies, and why are we even here today? So William and I will dive into that, but there's a lot to get into with this Epic stuff. I mean, there's an 80-page report from a judge, first of all, and it is all just blistering, angry. Apple clearly, I mean, all right, so starting from the beginning, right, Epic did this whole thing where they planned, premeditated this whole thing where they were going to sneak purchases that did not pay Apple's commission into the App Store, and Apple blocked it and kicked Fortnite and all this stuff, and in doing so triggered a series of marketing events that Fortnite ran within the game targeted at children, and this big video of 1984 but with Fortnite characters mimicking Apple's Super Bowl ad saying that they need to free Fortnite and allow Epic to sell things without commission on the App Store, ultimately hoping that they would be able to open their own Epic Games store on the App Store. It created this gigantic lawsuit that took 4 years or so to complete, and the ultimate thing was Apple won on every single count. Epic basically lost it was a big waste of time, except for one count, anti-steering. The judge said, well, this is where it gets complicated. The original hearing there's some back and forth between state and federal judges. The states ended up saying that the anti-steering needed to be enforced, and there's this whole deal, but ultimately we landed on Apple needs to get rid of their anti-steering practices, period. There was no wiggle room. So Apple did get rid of anti-steering in the worst imaginable way. You could call it malicious compliance. They basically made it useless.
But, sorry, you need. Yes, they did, and I want to know how, and I like what the judge said about it. But can you explain what anti-steering is? Because I don't know if it's just a UK thing, but it's not a term I was familiar with before all of this.
So this is one of those annoying terms where you don't really call it steering, I guess, but you call it anti-steering. Like there's no positive, so it's anti-steering. They don't want anti-steering. So basically, if you're on an app in the App Store, let's say you're in Fortnite and you want to buy Fortnite money, which its name actually escapes me right now, and you go to the App Store and you buy a bunch of whatever. There's a word for this, and it's bothering me. Roblox, it's Robux, right? It sounds like the name. Anyway, so you go buy the in-game currency. Well, if you buy it in the App Store, if you buy it from the app, as of 6 months ago, or as of when Fortnite was still in the App Store, Apple would take a 30% commission, or 50. Well, I think in this case 30% because Epic just makes too much money. So on every transaction, and this made Apple millions of dollars. This was a huge benefit. Epic, the Fortnite game was a giant success on the App Store. It blew up there, and there was a point in the court proceedings that it showed that Apple was making a huge amount of money from these in-app purchase commissions, and Epic just did not want anything to do with it. What they wanted to do was to say, hey, go to Amazon.com or Fortnite.website, whatever, and buy a $100 coupon that gives you a code that you put into Fortnite, and now you have money in-app to buy your junk, your skins or whatever. And that would avoid the fee altogether. And in order to do that, they would have to put a link to an external website. And Apple said no. And that's what anti-steering is. That you cannot, within any app in the App Store, show that external anything exists. Netflix wasn't allowed to do it for a long time, but then they made exceptions for streaming apps. Basically, any effort to get around a commission from Apple was disallowed. The ruling from the Epic Games trial said, no, you can't do that anymore. You have to allow people to have external links. You have to allow people to make purchases externally for apps. So what does Apple do? They get rid of their anti-steering rules, but the new rules are not that much better. And so, what's the word? Just bad that no one adopted them because it was actually cheaper to stay with the regular commission. So what you'd have to do as a developer is apply for an entitlement, an external linking entitlement, and then you'd be allowed to have one link, not even a button, one link in plain text inside of your app somewhere. Couldn't be in multiple places, couldn't be a splash screen, it couldn't be a pop-up. It couldn't even be in the storefront. It had to just be in the app somewhere. They were very specific. And when a person tapped this link, they would get a scare sheet saying, "Dear God, no, you're leaving the App Store. They will steal your kidneys and your firstborn child if you do this. Don't do it." And then if you click through anyway, then you're shown a storefront. But Apple tracks you to that storefront and knows that you've left and requires that app, like Epic Games, to report every dollar they make on external purchases, and they still have to pay Apple 27%. That 3% difference is credit card transaction fees, which Apple says, yeah, sure, we'll give you those. So it ended up being actually more expensive to do, and such a waste of time that no one did it. So Fortnite
I should
in March...
point out, actually, sorry, one thing about that I haven't seen reported very often is that business of... Apple tracks the user through to the site. If they buy something, Apple demands the fee. Apple actually went further and said if they buy anything either immediately or in the next 7 days after having gone through that link, we want our money, which sounds like really trying it on, but that's actually not uncommon for affiliate sales. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they still do it, but Amazon links have worked in similar ways. So I'm not like I'm trying to defend Apple, but they're maybe not as creative accounting as we thought. But
no, this is actually very standard, but the way Apple is going through it is definitely not ideal because the court clearly did not intend for this to be the case. So long story short, and I'll hush and I'll let you speak because there's just a lot of information to get through. We arrive at earlier this year. So Apple's been doing this for a few months, and no one's signing up for it. It's just a big waste of time. And so Epic files another thing. Now, this is what's funny about this. Apple and Epic had gone to courts to death over every single charge in this entire thing. They even took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finally said, no, stop it, we don't care anymore. And that should have been the end of it, technically. But then Apple failed to really comply with this order and the spirit of the order. We'll get back to that in a moment when we discuss what happened. But Epic filed basically saying Epic filed that Apple did not comply with the judge, Gonzalez Rogers, I believe. So then the judge, so this was in March, so then the judge reviewed the case, and now here we are, the end of April now, we're recording in May 1st. An 80-page document comes through from the judge saying, yeah, no, clearly Apple just did not follow what we wanted to happen here. And on top of that, there's now an accusation of contempt of court, which I think the district courts have already picked up on to say that Apple is going to be charged with contempt. Since I wrote this story, you can confirm that. And then on top of that, they said cease and desist all collection of commissions on any external purchases, cease and desist all requirements for linking, period, and make it. And there's several bullet points here we can go through, but basically, just wow, it was Apple did this themselves, and clearly during a recent testimony, and then I'll hush. A recent testimony from Phil Schiller uncovered that Luca Maestri, the CFO, and his people basically said, if we stop taking external commissions, it will hurt us. And Tim Cook agreed, and then they basically said, we need to figure out a way through this. And Phil Schiller advised against it, apparently, and Apple did it anyway. And so that little thing there is what tipped this over the edge, because if there was no understanding within Apple of what the court wanted them to do, there might have been a little bit of slack of, oh, well, I guess we didn't word this correctly. But no, the App Store head actually said, no, actually, we need to do it this way, and they didn't. So it looks really bad for Apple. This is a situation of their own doing at this point. I mean, they won the case on every front, William, so...
One reason I thought your AppleInsider Plus thing about the reputation of a company is interesting right now, because I think I'm not sure just Apple users, but generally we tend to anthropomorphize companies. Right back at the start of all this, like you said, Epic Games did this thing of... well, they made this point of, oh, Apple is doing terrible things to us, they've thrown us out, and, oh, look, here's an ad we spent 4 months preparing for this moment about. Epic Games, without question, did a bad thing there. They deliberately started all of this. They did that whole Microsoft-style thing of, we're trying to protect the little people, and are they hell? It's all after themselves. So I came away thinking Apple was just doing what it was doing, and now these people are trying to take the ball away, trying to get free use of stuff that Apple's invented. Therefore, Epic Games, bad people, Apple, good. But now you come to this point, and after Epic's, frankly, yapping on and on about this to the point where I stopped listening to them, they had a point. Right at the end, they had this big point about it. And you're right, Apple did some unnecessarily poor things for it. I mean, you mentioned that there are a lot of steps. Judge Rogers actually listed, I think it was 6 specific points, but even within those points they break out. So there's a very detailed article on AppleInsider about what each one actually means, because of course it's written in legalese. What does it mean to us as users? What does it mean to developers? And it is fascinating how fine a line Apple took to do the absolute letter of the law, the punctuation of the law. But as the ruling keeps saying, actually, I can't think I've ever read a ruling that was so angry. So it kept talking about it, Apple deliberately choosing the worst way of doing things. Here we are with Apple being ordered to change everything. And I suppose as a UK person, a relevant thing for me is this is a US judge making a ruling on a US company about the US App Store. I wonder what will happen to the App Store everywhere else. Presumably Apple will try to hang on to things, but do you know more about that?
I don't know. The US App Store feels like the baseline. Sure, when there's a ruling overseas somewhere in some other country, Apple generally just does it for that country, like we've seen with dating apps and other such things, casinos, and sure. But this is its home turf, and why would it build a different app store for everywhere else in the world other than the one in the United States? And Apple has a huge presence here. This is a large portion of its user base. It is a global company, but this isn't like, so why would it be a different business model everywhere? Now, this ruling, honestly, I think the point here, just on earnings itself, this is important. It's minuscule. It's meaningless. There's no actual money here for Apple. Now, if it was me, I would be, I'd be a millionaire. But it's not me. This is Apple we're talking about. And yes, it is a source of revenue, and it is not an insignificant source. We don't know the numbers. I mean, I'm sure somewhere in these court filings we could find out some arbitrary amount, but these external purchases, generally speaking, it's not like every app wants to do it, right? There are apps that do, and the apps that do generally are lucrative. Fortnite, Roblox, and then there's things like the Amazon Books, Netflix. Yes, there are lucrative sources, but at the same time, there are so many apps and games that will never do this because of time, because of trust. For me personally, as a user, all right, and I'm a nerd who understands this stuff. I don't want to download a game from the App Store and then have it bump me to a website every time I want to make an in-app purchase. If I want to open a new Pokemon card pack on the trading card game, I don't want to have to go to a third-party website, enter my credit card information, and make a purchase. That's just no. I mean, I understand maybe they'll make a couple dollars more doing it that way.
Yeah.
But I would probably just close the window and not do the purchase. And that is a lot of people. So this will change the business model for a lot of apps. It's effective immediately. So apps I know are formulating their updates to send to Apple right now to get away with this, but I don't think it's going to be as huge a thing, and it will lose them money. But how much? And is it worth pursuing? At this point, just say, okay, pay the fine, move on.
One thing there, you mentioned about at various points the documentation and numbers in it, and I've realised actually I'm quite shocked at you. You said practically nobody followed up on the 27% rule. Well, actually, we know from the court ruling 34 developers did, of whom 17 had never done any in-app purchasing of any kind at all before. So, yeah, that is actually not very big at all, is it? No.
Yeah, Apple has millions of developers. It's this thing they brag about all the time. They are stock full of them. And not to belabor this point too much, because this is something we could spend an entire episode on. But what do you think, William? What are Apple's choices? What are they going to do here?
They'll follow the letter of the law. Well, the letter is more than a letter this time. It's like underlined, bold, italic, really, really clear what they can and can't do. So they'll just do all of that, and at the same time they'll appeal it, and nothing will happen in the appeal, and they'll probably get taken to court, because that business of contempt of court and of alleged lying for it, those are incredibly serious allegations that you don't make about companies without great grounds for it.
They can, yeah, but that's a settlement, especially in big companies like this. That's not going to result in someone going to jail. That's going to be a settlement. They'll pay it off. It's great for headlines, but that's going to lead nowhere. Epic's just going to be like, look, Apple, they lied, whatever. Yeah, which if it is true, I'm not fully aware of that particular situation. That's awful. I mean, the guy who misspoke under oath, hopefully either actually misspoke or had a very good reason or whatever. But yeah, that's terrible. You shouldn't do that. That's that's the biggest no you can do, in our court system. But again, I think it won't lead to anything. I think this is just one of those. Okay, we agree. We're not going to accept fault, but here's a bunch of money to make this go away. And it will just go away. But there's one other option here. So Apple has to comply with the law. I do think this means a global change to the App Store, and it might mean a few other things. I think this could mean changes in the commission system altogether. so that Apple can earn more money on purchases to make up the difference. Maybe they'll accidentally push people to this system. I would hope that they know better than to do that. But outside of all those unknowns, let's not speculate. There is one offer that is on the table.
Okay.
From CEO Tim Sweeney himself.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. What is the offer? Give me all your money or else. No?
Fortnite. Fortnite could return to the iOS App Store as soon as next week, William. Isn't that exciting?
I know I'm not the games person and you are, but I had the impression when all of this started that Fortnite was actually on the wane, and that was one reason why Epic thought it could spend this on it. It now seems very old to me.
It's incredibly popular.
Still.
It's so popular. It's so these games are crazy. Like Minecraft has been around for 15 years, and they promised 15 more. And that's still going strong. And it's not even the same realm. I just bring it up because old games do last. Roblox is going on 8-9 years of just sheer popularity, 10 years here soon. And they're just getting started, more or less, because they're inventing new ways to monetize and take advantage of Roblox, and people are still playing the heck out of it. And Fortnite is the biggest one. It's huge. It is a game within a game type system. You can go in there and, you can do the Battle Royale stuff, but there's also like racing games and other stuff and things developers can make. It's its own ecosystem that, Epic takes a hefty commission on, ironically. But that's not the point here. It is popular, and it coming back to iOS would actually be important, but only for Fortnite. Because, what's funny about this whole thing and this offer? So it's not just, we're bringing it back. It's not coming back. Here's why it's not coming back. There's a condition. Apple would have to
beg,
go ahead and beg on hands and knees. You know what? Maybe they'll accidentally do it, comply with this, and then we'll see if Tim Sweeney actually follows through. Because we were just discussing Apple might do this anyway. Tim Sweeney says if Apple takes the judge's recommendations or requirements or whatever, the removing all of its requirements and external purchases and buttons and links and all those arbitrary things, do that globally, not in just the United States, and Fortnite will be back on the App Store next week. Now, why would they do that, William?
To irritate me? No, I can't think of a reason. There'd be a certain amount of crowing we won, and you don't, like I said about companies, they're not people, but in this case they would crow. What are the reasons?
Well, why would Epic Games want there to be zero? So basically what this does is if a developer wanted to, and Epic Games wants to, if a developer wanted to avoid Apple's commissions, now they are free to do so without any barriers, period, in the United States. Epic wants this globally. And the reason for that is because Fortnite is a global powerhouse. And if they brought Fortnite back to the App Store and everyone downloaded it and used external links to buy the Fortnite money, well, Apple makes $0.0. The only money Apple would ever make from Fortnite is the $100 a year for the developer fee, period. And Fortnite would just rake in the cash because it is a multi-million-dollar franchise that has to pay commissions to everywhere it is. But iOS is so big. There are so many people with iPhones and iPads, so many children out there begging to play this game on every system that they own, that they would just, it would be incredibly lucrative. And it would be the only place, other than through the Epic Games stores on PC, where they would be able to earn 100% of their profits through sales.
Although, actually, on its own store, presumably it has its own costs of running its own servers,
right,
whereas Apple is presumably paying for this. So
it'd be even more profitable.
Yeah. I think because this is likely to carry on for a while, we'll leave there, except I realise Phil Schiller's probably eating lunch on his own in Apple Park for a few days. That's the way it sounds. During all of that, you mentioned the thing about the app stores outside the US. Part of it's been affected by dating apps, of all things. As a thing I covered this week that I'd like your opinion about, a very, I think, peculiar thing where the Match group, which is apparently behind lots of dating apps, I think Tinder, that kind of thing,
Match.com, Tinder.
and Spotify. Yeah. Spotify and Meta have all got together to lobby Washington over age verification. Their position is age verification is obviously very important, but it should be Apple and Google who implement tools for it. It shouldn't fall on the backs of every individual app developer. Previously, Apple and Google have said, yeah, it should be on every app developer. So you could see why the fight was there. But this year, Apple has changed and is taking on that age verification by itself. So here is Meta and Google and Match.com putting together a consortium, inviting other people to join them, lobbying Washington to get Apple and Google to do what at least Apple is already doing. Is it just that they didn't get around to filing the paperwork until after Apple announced these things in February?
Well, they want to make sure Apple is held to the extent of the law to force them to do everything they want them to do. And they're trying to say, hey, we don't have to do anything now because Apple's doing it, which is dumb. Because I'll pose you one very obvious situation. An 11-year-old gets on a desktop and goes to a website. Who's controlling the age verification? The company, right? I'm sorry, Chrome needs to verify that. Get out of here, okay? At some point, these companies do need to be responsible for age verification. They just don't want it. And honestly, from my point of view, I don't want them to be either. So this is a big whole thing, all right? So the premise of the idea is fair. So in a pure, perfect world, knowing how old someone is on a website is useful because you can filter content and all that stuff. But how do you find out? Well, it requires collecting very sensitive, very specific data. So by putting it on the websites, now you're asking Facebook and Google, Spotify, whatever, Match Group, to collect sensitive data on minors, which is also just still a no-no. You're not really supposed to be able to do that. So now the laws are contradictory. On top of that, now they have to put in specific enforcement mechanisms, and then they're held liable if a child slips through the cracks and accesses stuff they're not supposed to anyway. So they don't want to do the age verification because they would be liable for the whole system. Now, if Apple's in charge of it and a child tricks that system and gets in anyway, and then they're found at whatever, well, now Facebook gets to say, well, it wasn't us who let the kid in. It was Apple. And they get to wash themselves of that completely. There's multiple levels here. I don't think age verification should be on the onus of the website owner or the platform. It should be on the parents, right? The parents should be enacting parental controls and should be tracking what kids are doing on their devices. And yes, I'm aware that kids do their own thing. That's a whole different conversation. Kids are going to explore. They're going to try to break rules. That's parenting 101. But the point is, it should still be on them on how this stuff is handled. Putting it on the ecosystem. Now, Apple introducing tools to make it easier for parents, that's great, especially since you don't need age verification at that point. You just say, my child is this age, and Apple says, okay, here's the filters. That's great. Now, taking it a step further and requiring Apple to collect data on these kids, from my perspective, at least it's Apple, because they're not going to do anything with that data. That's weird.
Well, I was actually in a briefing by Apple when they were about to announce the age assurance, they call it. And they stepped through the various levels, and I actually thought it was... I didn't know why it was taking so many steps and why it would take the whole year for it to roll out, but otherwise it actually seemed, I thought, very clever and very useful. And so when I read this original report about the lobbying, I wondered why these companies were doing it. I mean, I get that they don't want to spend the money, but why when the solution has been presented? But then the moment you said that about going on a desktop computer, that changed everything. I realised it all seems pretty pointless.
Well, here's what's funny. Take it a step further. So why do you think they announced this coalition this week? What could have happened in the news that would promote them to push hard on this legality situation? Well, I'll answer, William.
Thank you, because I genuinely don't know. Okay, yeah.
Meta released these AI tools to Instagram and Facebook, and now there's this Meta AI app that it's its own kind of social network, which is weird. But regardless, Meta AI is out in the wild, and you access it by having a Meta account on Instagram, Facebook, Meta, whatever. And what happened? Well, what could have possibly happened this week? Well, researchers have found that if they say that they are 13 years old... Oh, let me try that again. Researchers have found that if they tell their account, when they're creating their account on Meta, that they are 13 years old, and then go to the Meta AI chatbot, that they are, after conversing with it and putting themselves in situations or role-playing, what have you, they will be exposed to explicit materials. If you go into a role play where Meta AI is using the voice of John Cena to talk to you, which is real, and it starts flirting with you and telling you that you have an amazing developing body that deserves attention or whatever, and it goes from there into more and more explicit situations with an account that says they are 13, yeah, that is a not good situation, and now that is all over the headlines, and it is Meta's fault because they are the ones doing the age verification system. They don't have to hold any of that accountability if it is someone else's fault.
Well, I kind of missed all that, and I think I'm glad I am. I thought the only AI problem this week was that Raycast is now on iOS, and Raycast is a very good Mac app. It's brilliant that it's coming to iOS because of how the platforms work. It's obviously very different, but it's a quick way into multiple AI tools, and I asked it how many days until a particular thing I need to do, and it told me, well, since today is October 10, 202, the answer is all of this. And what is the point of not... I've had AI not be able to count, not be able to add up, not knowing today's date and things, and we rely on this stuff. But
I was gonna say one last thing just while we're on the AI topic. Well, we have a couple of AI topics today, but I just wanted to mention this week there was also some news that was kind of funny to brighten the mood here. You know, venture capital firms, investors?
yes.
The guys who are giving millions and millions of dollars to these AI tools and companies, right? They said, AI is the future, and it is powerful, and it is going to take over, and it's basically a danger to every job in human existence, except for one. Do you want to know which one, William?
Venture capitalism, by any chance?
You got it. How did you figure it out?
Okay, right. I feel I can go no further. How about this then? I was about to say, please cheer me up with some news, because there has been, well, is it news? Is it rumour? I don't know. The iPhone 17. Like, people have got dummy models of this. Now, I know every year there are renders, there are rumours, there are CAD drawings and things, and then somebody 3D prints the CAD drawing, but this year it feels like more. Like, everywhere you look, there's every possible way a working copy of this, except it doesn't work. What do you make of all of this? Should we care yet? Is it ruining the surprise?
I'm wondering how long until someone starts making these dummy models and just boots iOS onto it and it's just like, here's the next iPhone. And we just have a working iPhone before the event. We can't be far from that now, right? Because these are getting to be really sophisticated. I know they're just slabs of aluminum and glass with nothing in them, but we're one step away from someone actually making these working smartphones. Yeah, this is cool. They're everywhere because case manufacturers make them. I think it's like the same company and they just give them to or sell them to everyone. I don't know. But we got our hands on some. We've covered other people having them, but yeah, here they are. They're cool. This is a pretty solid chance. Now, this is still what you'd call a mock-up. I think I'm looking at the iPhone 17 Pros that Andrew is holding here in this photo, and maybe it's the angle, but it looks like the camera bars are off center and angled slightly, like they were laid incorrectly on the mold. Anyway, Apple's final industrial design will be a perfection of this, so to speak. Right. So we still haven't seen what exactly Apple's take on this is going to be, but this is as close as we're going to get before Apple announces it. And from renders in January to these models today, it has increasingly gotten better, in my opinion, to the point now I'm not offended by this. The original designs that we saw were just awful because people were making them too bulbous, awkward. They didn't know what to do with the coloring, so the two-tone stuff and the metal component, like, there was just a lot of weirdness. Well, this supposedly final design seems fine because honestly, they just look like iPhones with the camera bar extended to the edge. And I guess that's what we always should have expected.
Well, I remember right at the start when we first saw them, you were very anti. You thought they looked horrible, and you were very convincing. And I've kind of slowly become inured to it rather than turning to like them. But isn't there just a little bit of you that wants Apple to be secretly giggling in Apple Park, and then in September they come out a totally different design, and all of this is wrong?
I can't wait. I can't wait for them to come out with John Prosser's iPhone 4 anniversary flat edge design, and that be what is actually... No, there's practical reasons for this design, right? You're stuffing a bunch of camera components into a thicker area, and that's... Right now, the thickness of the phone is fully determinate on two things: the size of the USB-C port connector and the camera components. And that's it. Everything else is miniaturized to the point it can be. I mean, look at the iPad Pro. It is thinner than an iPod
Touch,
Touch. So you can go really thin with these things to the point that you don't have space for the USB-C port anymore. And maybe that's where we're getting to this portless idea in the next decade, whatever. But I don't know. I mean, you have to have space for cameras. Cameras are physical objects, just like batteries are. Batteries, with their chemistry, very physical thing. They need space. They need heat dissipation. Cameras as well need space in order to operate and take good photos and provide good depth and all of that. So that's the last frontier here. And you can't really beat physics. So how do you get the space? You shrink everything on the phone to the point of no return and leave the space for the cameras. And that's what they're doing.
Is it still the case that the camera lenses will protrude further than the camera bump around them?
At this point, the camera lens is almost as thick as the phone. Right? Like if you look at the Slim and if you take the total width of the camera bar and the lens next to the thickness of the body, it's basically the body's thickness, maybe a little bit thinner, but not by much. If you flattened it and there was no camera bar and there was no camera bump, it was just a perfectly flat phone, it would double the thickness of the iPhone Slim.
I have no problem with the camera bump. My problem is because it's off-centered on the current models. Every time you put the phone down, face up, it's wobbly on the table. And it seemed to me, the very first thing I thought when I saw an elongated camera bump was, at least, it wouldn't wobble, it would be at a slight angle, and that could even be good in all possible ways. And it doesn't look like that's what we're getting. So I'm actually a little disappointed there. But
well, cases, I think, will solve for this. This is actually something that's kind of excited me about this device. Is I think cases are going to be really interesting this time. I can't explain why this would make that much of a difference, but in my head it does.
Right. I was waiting to hear why, but
well, so currently I have a case that isn't a case. It's a magnetic back made of leather, made by Nomad, that literally just uses MagSafe magnets and adhesion strips to suction to the back of the phone. And it sits there, and it covers the whole back. The sides are completely exposed, and there's a small camera rim around the cameras. But that design is excellent. Now, apply that to the entire camera bar. I don't know how this case is going to exist, honestly, other than maybe they just don't put any leather where the bar is. It is literally a strip of leather that sits below the camera bar, which, honestly, fine. It gives you a little grippy point. But I don't know. There's a lot of questions about how this is going to work and what it's going to look like. I could see So I'm going to be reviewing soon, and I won't get into the who's and whats because it's a fun project. But there's this case from a company that's highly modular with a lot of components, and it's kind of made of metal, but it's this shell the phone sits in and leaves the MagSafe area exposed. So it's actually pretty lightweight the way they've made it, even though it's metal, and it's this industrial grade design. And it feels nice in the hand. And it wraps all the way around the phone. Now with the camera bar, I feel like they could have some fun with the industrial design and just go even further. We're going to get some pretty wacky stuff here, I think. And it opens up some opportunities for some interesting stuff. And that thinness that we're gaining because of the camera bar and the weight savings that we're getting, you're just going to add back with the case. But now I honestly think that's a feature because I can have an iPhone that weighs as much as an iPhone, but customize it with my own external attributes, right? This gets back to that whole naked robotic core stuff that we talked about with the iPad. The iPhone is becoming literally this display, battery, and camera. And if you want a thicker, more protective case or leather iPhone, whatever, it's no longer you're adding twice the weight and twice the thickness. You're just returning it to full iPhone thickness and depth and weight by adding accessories, and I think that's interesting.
Rather than like the externals, I suppose, of the iPhone, let's take a minute to talk about the internals, because there's a story this week, a very specific story about Apple Intelligence and how Google, have they promised, are they committed, or they just said they want Gemini to be part of Apple Intelligence the way ChatGPT is at the moment. Is that something you see being announced at WWDC, or will they wait for the iPhone 17, right?
They could have announced this last June. The problem is there's this little lawsuit going on accusing Google.
Not another one.
Right. It's oops, all lawsuits.
Welcome to the Legal Insider Podcast. Yes, okay. Sorry. I genuinely didn't know this either. What's this suit about? Okay.
Well, this is about Google dominating search. Yeah. Are they a monopoly? Do they have to sell Chrome? Do they have to divest search and ads, and like do they have to basically break up Alphabet, right? Mm-hmm. Which it's so fun. It's just I want to note that I feel like everyone forgot collectively, and I'm just going crazy, that Meta and Alphabet both changed the names of their company about the same time, and everyone knew then, and I feels like they don't know anymore, or maybe they do and they just don't say it. We knew that they were changing their name because they wanted to relieve some of the regulatory pressure from their individual entities.
Distance themselves.
Right. Facebook was embarrassed. Yeah, Facebook was embarrassed by all of the junk that was going on with that. God, what was that scandal? The name is...
Cambridge Analytica, yes. Right. Amongst others, yes.
Right, so they wanted to get as far away from that by saying, oh, we're Meta now, we're not Facebook. And Google did the same thing. They're like, we're not Google, we're Alphabet. Look at all these companies. We're promoting all of these things. Anyway, they both did it to and it's just shot themselves in the foot because now they're even bigger than they were. And moving on, so Google's in this whole lawsuit, and I have a feeling that they were waiting on certain rulings to go through, because imagine you're in a lawsuit and you're going up to tell the court, yeah, we're not a monopoly. We're not paying Apple anything. By the way, Apple just brought our artificial intelligence onto every iPhone on the planet. So, cool. Gemini might come this year. Maybe they found a way to do it, or maybe they've specifically asked the judge about, who knows, but it's coming. It was always coming. They could have flipped a switch at any time, but I think they were waiting for regulatory pressures to back off a little bit.
I always associate Apple Intelligence with iPhones, and of course it's on everything. But speaking of everything, I got to write something this week. I don't know why it fell to me, and it seems so strange. I wrote about the Mac Mini, and I love the Mac Mini, but I wrote a piece about, really clever guy on YouTube who has found a way to make the Mac Mini portable. And did you watch this? Because you're a Mac Mini user. Do you know about this?
This is probably the least efficient way to make your Mac Mini portable, but I love it. Like this is just someone with a 3D printer and a lot of time who made this fun little. It's basically they found a display that was the exact length of a keyboard and made a folding shell for it. I don't know, like it's maddening what they've done here. And then they put the Mac Mini next to it in a little case, and it's a one whole unit. Yes. It needs an AC outlet to run.
Even the guy himself says, I don't think he uses the terms like air quotes around portable. He just say, yeah, I know. But he did actually allude to the fact that he has another design that would actually work with a battery, but it would be incredibly heavy and very expensive. So he wasn't going to show it then, and maybe he will at some point. But yeah, I was entertained by the cleverness of it, and do everybody read the article on AppleInsider because we've got photographs on there, and I quite fancy that peculiar shaped monitor for it. But overall, we did work out.
Well, you like the wide aspect.
That's
ratios.
True. Yes, I like wide. I would like taller as well in my own, but wide is good. We did calculate. I did the calculation, adding up which monitor he got, and the keyboard had to be bought from eBay because certain size no longer, so all sorts of things. So trying to find out the average eBay price for all of this worked out very roughly. This whole operation costs 3 times more than just buying a MacBook Air, and that's when he kind of lost me a little bit there. That does include about $2,000 for a 3D printer, and I suppose you could use that for one or two other things as well.
Well, this is how I don't know the yes, you're not going to make one of these things for inexpensively, or if you already have all the disparate products laying around the house and you just want to Rube Goldberg this thing, go nuts. But I don't know. There's another argument to be made. I made a portable Mac Mini, but see, I already had the Mac Mini, I already have the Vision Pro, I already have a keyboard, and I already have a trackpad.
I've forgotten that, yeah.
So the cost for me was $64, but the theoretical cost is a $4,000 headset, a $1,000 computer, and $500 in accessories. I know, but assuming you already have all this junk, all you really need is a battery. And for me, I think the purest form of portable Mac Mini is using the Vision Pro virtual display. And as Vision Pro advances, as it gets lighter and thinner, I think that'll become a more and more realistic use case. I mean, I can get it to run for 3 hours-ish on that battery, and so it already lasts as much as, if not longer than the Vision Pro itself on battery power. So we're already there. Someone needs to make a bespoke battery for it. That would be neat. That connects over an AC, what you call like a donkey tail. It's literally just a piece hanging off the back of the battery that would plug directly into the AC port with no extra cable, and then have the Mac Mini sit in a little cradle on top of the battery. Bam, you're done. What does this do to Wi-Fi? Terrible things, because apparently the Wi-Fi goes absolutely bonkers if you put anything metallic underneath the Mac Mini. So that's another problem to solve for. Maybe someone could find a way to attach an antenna strip to the base of it exactly where it needs to go. I don't know, but there's ways to do this, and this was a fun experiment, but it is not the way.
This episode is brought to you by Fast Growing Trees. Did you know Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the US with thousands of different plants and over 2 million happy customers? They have all the plants your yard needs, like fruit trees, privacy trees, flowering trees, shrubs, and so much more. Whatever plants you're interested in, Fast Growing Trees has you covered. Find the perfect fit for your climate and space. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but with so many plants, so many options, take your time. Relish choosing what's best for you. Now, okay, if you're in the States, you can find a plant in an instant. You can order it immediately, and you can know it will be at your door in just a few days. Here in the UK, where I am, well, all right, I thought I'd have a bit of a nice time reading the Fast Growing Trees catalogue. And then, okay, when I found it had videos with gardening tips and advice, well, fine, obviously, surely I was going to watch some of those. But then I also thought I was working on one particular gardening project, the rearrangement of our garden since we had to remove a tree. There's no such thing as one gardening project, is there? There is no such thing as gardening being over and done with, which means I am wearing out the videos on Fast Growing Trees, and you should be ordering regularly. I mean, they have everything. You need everything, or maybe possibly just want everything. But this spring, they have the best deals for your yard, up to half off on select plants and other deals. And listeners to our show get 15% off their first purchase when using the code AppleInsider at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code AppleInsider at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code AppleInsider. Now is the perfect time to plant. Use Apple Insider to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. And thanks to Fast Growing Trees for supporting the Apple Insider Podcast. You mentioned in there your adventures with Apple Vision Pro. And that there's something I want to ask you about. Actually, I very specifically want to know you had to pronounce something. But previously on Apple and Vision Pro and Siri in particular, it would have been back in January, Kim Varath is moved over to the Siri team. And then suddenly the head, that's the name I can't pronounce, John, how do you pronounce an ex-head of Siri? John Giandrea?
John Gianandrea.
Yeah, thank you. I was so close to it. I should have took a run up at it and had a go, but
they call him JG internally.
Oh, now you tell me. Okay, so Kim Varath comes in. She's the fixer in Apple that we haven't heard of before, but apparently has a fantastic reputation for getting projects back on track and going. She comes in. JG, my pal JG, is suddenly out. All these things are going on, and this week there's a thing about the robotics team being moved away from JG's AI to prioritise hardware, and I don't really understand what that means for it. Is this back to the robot you're waiting for?
All right, so there's a lot going on here. I actually was mistaken before. I don't know if I said it on the show, but I misunderstood. I thought he was out as a chief executive, and he is not. So what John Gianandrea is actually in charge of is the AIML team, right? So he is oversight of Apple Intelligence, machine learning, and those systems. Over time, Apple brought other things underneath him. For a time, Apple Car was there for some reason. Siri and robotics were all different teams under AIML. What Apple's doing is basically taking all these extra teams out, allegedly to give his team more focus on AI and ML. And so I have two theories here. And so, yeah, it's fine. Robotics is now under hardware. That makes more sense. They're building robotic arms that will hold iPads and follow you around the room. It needs to be a hardware component. I don't know why it would be under a software's focus team. So, fine. People are seeing this as a possible sign that Apple will ultimately disband AIML completely, and Gianandrea will be out of the job or moved somewhere else internally, or he'll just leave the company, which is also an option. That almost makes sense because, all right, I'll get into that in a second. Second option is what it looks like on the surface, what people said before. They're just trying to take all of the distractions away and have them focus entirely on developing models. Here's why that doesn't make sense and why I think option one is more likely. The original approach of AI from Apple and a lot of other companies was it's this monolith. It needs its own division. It needs all of this focus, all of this money, all of this investment. It's just not true. Don't believe the hype. Instead, what AI is a tool. It's another software platform, right? It doesn't need maybe it needs its own division of like two people to curtail a back-end, base model, whatever. But every division should have its own AI team, right? Siri should have an AI team. Vision Pro should have an AI team. iPhone should have an AI team, right? Everyone should have its own separate AI teams to specifically make agents for their devices, for their apps and systems. That's the better approach because more specific models work better and are less likely to hallucinate. Sure, there's probably should be somewhere in the company working on the what you'd call base model that everyone else is pulling from. But do you need a chief executive that reports directly to Tim Cook in charge of that team, or should that be under software, under Craig Federighi, right? Or wait, he's hardware. Anyway, John Turnus is hardware. There's too many executives. Anyway, Federighi is software, I believe. I think what's happening is yes, they are shaving off the pieces and ultimately will disband it, but not in a bad way, because I think this is just the new approach. This is the smarter approach to Apple Intelligence, and we're seeing changes already in how they're asking developers to help with training, they're asking users to help with training, and they're introducing more tools that are specific to apps, like the health app potentially will get a coach, or doctor, as someone called it. I don't think it's a doctor, but that's where we're going, and the signs of this restructure are pointing to that, and I think it's fine. And I don't think they're punishing Gian and Andrea. I just think it's a newer, better approach, and we'll see what he decides to do with that.
I have been trying to keep you talking for as long as possible so that we would avoid something, but we're not going to. I will say first that Apple did actually launch something new this week, which is slightly odd, actually, but we will come to that after the time that is Controversy Corner. What have we got controversially this week?
Other than how we both say the word differently.
Yes, we do.
That's a controversy in its own. No, there's not much here this week, and I know we're already at our hour mark here, but we'll get in and out of it very quickly, because I just wanted to point out there's a lot going on still. Tariffs hanging over our heads, exemptions, and future tariffs on semiconductors, yada yada. We don't need to recap this every time, so we're going to just assume you guys already know everything and move on. Commerce Secretary, I think that's the
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick.
He says that we're just waiting on robot arms to arrive to build iPhones in the United States. It's just no, it's not happening. We're not building iPhones. There are semiconductor plants being built. We broke ground on one in Arizona, another one, like I think this is 3 now. These factories won't be operational for a long time, years even, on scale. China is blocking the export of a lot of manufacturing equipment necessary to make these things, just as a punishment for the ongoing tariff war. It's not easy. And none of these factories being built in the United States are for assembling iPhones, by the way. They're for making processors so far, both on the TSMC side of acquiring Intel plants and on the Arizona factories. They're all fabs. So that's one thing moving forward. But Apple's also opening factories. It took years for these factories to be built in India, and they're just now opening them. And it's going to be manufacturing iPhone like 17s, right? But base models. Apple's slowly moving more assembly to India because it's going to be the lower tariff target by the administration, and it makes more sense and less reliance on China, all that stuff. But there's still really no talk of assembly in the United States. And I don't know what it's going to take for the administration to understand the iPhone would cost $4,000 if it was built in the United States. We don't have the people. We don't have the assembly plants. And importing everything from every country would cost a lot of money in tariffs if the tariffs were still in place when we were doing this. So it is not financially viable because we can't source the parts from the United States. We would be sourcing them from elsewhere anyway. There's literally just no way to do it in a feasible financial way. And getting the workforce trained up to do this, or an AI, whatever, intelligent enough to do this, we're talking decades before we're even capable of building one iPhone that costs them as much as an iPhone in the United States. So I don't know why this is something they're clinging to, but they keep coming back to it. It's not happening.
It's a good story. That's all it is. This is very UK perspective about how our politicians work, and I can't apply it to States because I don't know enough, but it's very often sometimes that there is preaching to the choir for it. You are talking to your base about what you think the base will like, even though you know it has no basis in reality and things. It's unfortunately reasonably common, and especially it seems in technology here. Sometimes it sounds like it's the same in the States. They do know, but they think we want to hear. So, but if it's going to take decades, why not start now?
It's just we're just not made for this anymore. It doesn't make sense. I mean, and it's there's no reason to close off our borders and try to do everything in the United States. We're a global economy. We should be working together and taking advantage of the resources that we have at every stop, not trying to make it goes against everything that humanity is based on. It doesn't make sense financially. It doesn't make sense physically. Like, where are you going to put all these plants? Are we just going to fill a desert with manufacturing plants and just have a bunch of, tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of people, move them to a city in the Nevada desert and say, okay, good luck, and send them supply lines of food to make sure they don't starve to death and make them work 24 hours a day in an assembly line? It's not how we do things. And that's not how China does things. I know there's this myth that there's like child laborers and slaves in China building these iPhones. Okay. I will say there's been provable problems with Uyghur slaves in China. That's a whole different story. We're not going to talk about that right now. I know that's a thing. That's not the majority, though. Almost all of the workers in China and Taiwan and these other places are just employees that work for a company. They make a paycheck. Some of them do live in villages, which is more lucrative for them because they don't have a commute, right? It's a different way of life. Can you imagine, right? So this is how an average day, or let's say an average quarter for a Chinese worker is. They say goodbye to their family, hop on a bus, and go down the street to Semiconductor Lane and move into their new cot with their roommate so that they can work 10 to 12 hours a day assembling iPhones, go back home to their cot every day for 6 days a week, and then their paycheck is sent directly home so their family can buy food. And they do that for a month, 2 months at a time, and then they get to go home and relish some of the wealth that they've made and work an easier job for a little while, and then they go back to it. And it's a flip-flop. And they choose to do that because they're a highly, they see that as like a work ethic thing. They love it. I don't know. It's a different culture, right? I'm not asking you to understand their culture, but that is not the United States culture. I can barely convince my niece to work at Starbucks for 6 hours a week, right? It's completely different over here. And the idea that we're going to do that here is it's maddening. It just isn't going to happen.
This from a man who joined the military and was away for months at a time, I presume, on ships and things. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it was different because at least when I went on deployment, there was still a sense of freedom. Right, I still had free time, and they have the same facilities. They have televisions, they have gyms, right? So they're not slaves. They go eat lunch. So I guess you could see it almost as a deployment in a similar way. But the problem is with that analogy is that military in the United States is actually getting smaller because less people want to make those kinds of commitments.
Well,
not more. Yeah, the United States military is shrinking drastically year over year. So to say, oh, instead of serving your country by shooting bullets, serve your country by working in a plant, it's just not going to happen. It's just not.
Actually, we could talk about this forever about this. How about...
I have one little tiny tidbit.
Yeah.
This isn't very controversial. I just thought it was funny. We have 2 reports from analysts saying that Apple is benefiting from the tariff war. I just thought that was fun.
We talked about earnings at the very start of the call. Well, if you've ever listened to an earnings call, and really, why would you? Apple very, very slowly reads out its press statement, basically, about its earnings. And then analysts come on and ask questions Apple will never answer. And then the next analyst asks the same question that Apple still will never answer. And yet they get paid for this. Now we have another definition of controversy.
Yeah. These... reports, I just wanted to real quick, these reports are just so funny to me because they're like, we're not going to talk about the future because it's too unrealistic. There's too much going on. But it's also like, if Apple is making more money now because demand has moved from the fall to the spring, doesn't that mean that they're going to make less money on new iPhones? Let's not talk about that. Like, we're talking about how good they're doing right now because of tariffs. And the future is too unpredictable. We don't know. It's just like, guys, come on. But
out of controversy corner into the last thing of the show, and this is the thing I know about because I Not only did I write about this, I did a screen recording of it in order to find out what was really going on. And it's Apple's new, I wanted to say Snapchat, but it's Snapshot. There's a new website. It is at snapshot.apple.com. And should you choose to go there on any browser you like, you get a gorgeously minimalist white screen, a few controls at the top, but then this very, very, very slow moving horizontal scroll of little cards with a small face of an athlete, an artist, or a musician, and their name next to it. And it just crawls on by, 2 rows of it, moving at the same speed but at a slightly different starting point. And for a little while, it's mesmerizing. But I was desperate to find out who was on this, who wasn't, how many there were. So I screen recorded it and then scrubbed through just to, survive the journey to the end. There are 2 rows of 18 people on there. Famous actors, Rashida Jones, Matt Damon's on there, Lady Gaga, various artists, and then 2 groups, BTS and Coldplay. So I can't fully see the logic of any of this, but you watch very slowly, and if you click on somebody you like, you get a page that summarizes quick bio of them, links out to everything they've ever done that's in any way on Apple, so mostly Apple Music, but also some Apple TV, some Apple Sports stuff as well. And then if you click back to go out of it, you're at the start again of the very slow thing. So good luck if you happen to spot 2 people in a row you like, and they're way down the list of 18. Apple brought this out, and it's quite polished. Did I mention that it's slow? It's quite polished and very minimalist, and it looks good, but it's slow. And they didn't mention that they've launched it. And it feels like it's the start of something. Have you played with it, and are you excited to see what happens next?
Did you know that Lionel Messi is an Argentine soccer player?
I actually know that he was a very, very big football player and did some incredible thing. I don't know what that would be in football, but presumably scored a lot of goals. And then, as his career was winding down, went over to America. So, is he still good? I don't know.
I'm just tapping through some of these, and it is incredibly slow. This is obviously, if I had to guess, not Spotlight. Maybe Spotlight. Spotlight would be a part of it, but Insight on Apple TV is a new feature for stars on Apple TV. You tap on Insight and you get their little cards. I have a feeling,
right? So when the show isn't good enough to hold your attention, you can press buttons to read things about it. That
you can also have it open on an iPad or iPhone next to you, and then using AirPlay connect to the TV and have Insight show up as you're watching it,
or as you're actually not watching it. Yeah, that's the way.
I think that's a feature. I can't remember, but anyway, there's an interface that allows you to examine music that's playing, artists, stuff that shows up in the show. I have a feeling that this is kind of a way to say this is our data point. Maybe they needed 2 sides of this. One, maybe they're building a backend to build an app. I don't know if it would be called Snapshot. That would be interesting. But it could be its own IMDb-like database that's basically just links to Apple services, which would be cool. But it doesn't just talk about Apple services. Some of these things are films and movies that are available in the Apple TV app, but they're not made by Apple TV Plus. So I don't know. I feel like this is an interesting concept. Maybe I don't think apps like Call Sheet or IMDb need to be worried about it. It's its own thing. But I'm okay. I always like more things from Apple. I think this might be an interesting way to get information. In Spotlight already, if you search for an artist, Apple actually has, I don't know if you've ever done this, William, but if you just search for either an artist or an actor and in Spotlight and click their name, you get a card very similar to what's showing up here in Snapshot. Have you done that before?
No, but they're surfacing the information in different places. That sounds good. I think actually why don't we all just get a very large mug of tea and sit down in front of snapshot.apple.com and watch the world go by very, very slowly. And while we're doing it, we can do that thing you do of not paying attention to what you're looking at all, and instead emailing people. That's the way to reach me. Email is best, william@appleinsider.com, and I'm, again, embarrassed to say that as much as I love it, I'm slightly behind for it. Wes, email for you would be wes@appleinsider.com, I think, but what's the best way to reach you?
Yep, that's right, and you can get a hold of me on Blue Sky. I get some good messages there. I also have been getting some good emails still from listeners. Always happy to get those. And we're also looking at podcast reviews. This week there are a couple of new reviews I wanted to highlight. So we have Reese8111 says they've been listening for years, and they love the stories, especially the personal tech ones, even though some are, behind a paywall with Apple Insider Plus. But they also note the audio that other people have noted. Yes, we are trying to figure it out. This week, for my ears, William sounds really good, so we'll see what happens in the edit. But, hey, we're working on it. Bear with us. Once we figure it out, I feel like it will never be an issue again. But for my ears, I don't know. When I listen, yes, you have to turn up the volume, but that's about it. I've definitely heard worse, but don't worry, guys, we are working on it. And we have another review from Laura925. This is a comment on AI, basically saying yes, they agree if AI gets its answers from the internet, which is full of stuff that's made by AI. How could it possibly be trustworthy? Because it's basically feeding into itself. And can a program learn to analyze what is actually a trustworthy source? I agree, and I'm glad that you listen to the show. I'm happy for the 5-star review. So thank you guys for your reviews, and continue leaving them in Apple Podcasts. We'll keep an eye out for those. And
I love getting good reviews, and the audio stuff, that is entirely me. It's not you. I've only been working on it for about 11 billion years, but we'll get there. In the meantime, if you are an Apple Insider Plus subscriber, this week we're going to be talking about the reputation of Apple and how it affects us. And Wes said at the start about how it affects your buying decision now, but the moment she said it, I can actually remember key moments in Apple history where it was a problem. Well, but we'll get into that next.
Well, I think William might have made it better, because my pitch is, does Apple's success as a company play a role? But reputation, maybe it's a bit of a wider point, yes. But either way, we'll be getting into that.
Or at least we will if you subscribe to Apple Insider Plus, which is the ad-free and extended version, and you can get to that through Patreon or through Apple Podcast subscriptions. Either way, if you don't already, it would be such a treat to have you with us. And for the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to Wes. Thank you very much to our sponsor, Fast Growing Trees. And we'll speak to you next week.
Yep, talk to you all then.